I didn't expect so many people over the years to come up and say, this totally changed the way I run games and run all of my games. So that's, the best thing that you can possibly hear, right? So you need to be an egotist to make art, but I'm not enough of an egotist, or at least not at that time, to have anticipated that so many people would say that.
Robin Laws is a name you will hear mentioned repeatedly by other creators I interview on this podcast. He's an author, game designer, RPG icon, and problem solver. Is RPG comment not cinematic enough and it takes too long? Robin gives us Feng Shui. RPG investigations are tedious, easily derailed by bad rolls, and don't feel like the mysteries in the movies. Robin gives us the GUMSHOE system. RPG social conflict is boring and doesn't feel like the tense dramatic scenes we see in Game of Thrones or Sopranos. Robin gives us Hillfolk. This episode is being released in early July 2021. If you're listening to it then, one of his horror GUMSHOE games is up on Bundle of Holding. Click on the Bundle of Holding link in the show notes to get $120 worth of books for his horror RPG Yellow King for less than $30. This offer is a steal for a great game, and part of the revenue goes to charity. Well, Robin did not disappoint. We talk about how he became an author and creator, and how he came up with his innovative systems and mechanics. Robin pulls back the curtain and holds nothing back. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Robin.
Third Floor Wars delivers interviews, insights, and discussions about everything hitting the tabletop. Rulebooks, plastic models, dice, and cards in hand. Let the gaming begin. Tabletop games let you escape and unleash grand battles and regale epic tales of adventure with your friends. If you love gaming and learning from players, designers, experts, and creators, you are in the right place. Pull up a chair. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk Podcast.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today we're talking to game designer and author Robin Laws. Robin may be best known for his GUMSHOE RPG system, or maybe Feng Shui, or maybe Robin's laws of good game mastering, but that doesn't list everything that he has created. He has created a long list of content. We're going to try to touch on as much of it as we can today. So Robin, welcome to the Third Floor.
Thank you so much for having me. What are on the other two floors?
So first floor, I've got my kitchen and all that. And then on the second floor are the bedrooms. But basically, when I bought this house, I work from home with my day job. And I told my wife that I either needed a refinished basement or a refinished third floor because I needed an office. But the deal for her, the incentive for her to make it happen is all of my game stuff would not be anywhere she could see it. And so
the third floor is the exile floor.
It's exactly right. The third floor is my domain. I think in the 6 years we've owned this house, probably she's been up here 4 times. And that makes her very happy. And she doesn't have board games and role-playing books and everything. And if I leave something downstairs, third floor, she'll just point to it and point up and say, that goes to the third floor.
So this is where you stash evidence of your many crimes.
Well, that's exactly right. You know, she can never fully calculate how much damage I've done to our finances without coming up here. But it's nice. It works out really well. And I've got gaming tables all set up. It's about 700 square feet. So
those of us who design games depend on people like you to have entire floors full of games. So thank you for your service.
You're a big fan, right?
Yeah.
That's great. So Robin, you're going to get probably the standard question, the origin story. So at some point you knew nothing about tabletop gaming, role-playing games or anything. And then suddenly it was put in front of you for the first time. Can we go back to that time?
So in the 70s, as a kid, I was interested in science fiction and fantasy, and among the magazines that I read were analog science fiction. And at that time, an analog magazine had ads from TSR, which of course did Dungeons and Dragons, Metagaming, which is the first game company that Steve Jackson US worked at. And so I was aware that there was this thing called role-playing games, especially Dungeons and Dragons, seemed very interesting. And it somehow seemed like it was a story, yet also a game. But of course, it wasn't remotely clear from the little one-page ads in this black and white digest-sized magazine what that entailed. And I did finally order something from Metagaming, which was a little war game called Chitin. We had these little tiny paper counters, and you had a fight with them, and there was like alien insects versus each other. And so I tried that out with a friend, and it didn't seem like much of a thing. Finally, I'm on vacation with my family. We're going through North America and various vacations in a motorhome, and our adventures took us to a colonial tourist town in Virginia. There's a gift shop. Bottom floor of the gift shop, there's a handful of games, and one of them is Blue Box D&D.
Wow.
So I convinced my dad to buy me Blue Box D&D, and this is back in the day when there's no dice in it. You just get, once again, little pieces of cardboard paper with the numbers on it. And so I would take D&D back to the motorhome. We're driving down the highway in your beautiful country, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck is the deal with this book, of course, because this is in the prehistoric era where the what is a role-playing game sidebar has not yet been conceived of, so you don't know what the deal is with it. So finally I sort of figured it out, convinced my younger brother, who's 5 years younger than me, so just at the edge of possibly understanding this, and my dad to have them run their two characters through a dungeon that I created. And my dad was immediately killed by a carrion crawler, and that was the extent of his role-playing hobby. That was it for him. But when I got home, I got on the phone, called up the friend that we tried to do chitin with, and said, I just found this game, this Dungeons and Dragons, the game, while I was on vacation. Do you think you might be interested in coming over and playing it? And my friend said, I've been waiting for someone to tell me that for my entire life. So he came over and he roped other people in, and that's how we discovered Dungeons and Dragons. And it turned out that indeed there were other D&D things that existed at that point in our local hobby store in the small city that I grew up in. Started getting those in, and so this was the point when the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual for AD&D existed, but not yet the Dungeon Master's Guide. Right. So if anyone wants to go and do the research, they can pinpoint exactly when this was that I got involved in role-playing.
And it sounds like it was immediate, Robin, where you were just like, once you grokked the original rules of it and started, playing it, you were hooked?
Yeah, basically. And of course, later on, we followed the pattern where it's like, wait a minute, there seem to be other games that are like this. And so we expanded with other things, the initial TSR things, Top Secret, which of course is, in its first edition, is famously broke and difficult to operate. Well, finally, I discovered Chaosium things, Call of Cthulhu, and suddenly running a Call of Cthulhu adventure or reading it, I guess I realized, wait a minute, these actually are stories, and it can have a narrative, and it can be part of an art form. And so from there, I went to RuneQuest, to Greg Stafford's World of Glorantha, which my current day's work is on a RuneQuest project. So. I remember back to those days in RuneQuest 2, you would look at the back, and there would be a list of different products that were coming out, and one of them was HeroQuest. I didn't realize I would have to grow up and become a game designer in order for HeroQuest to come out. It seems like an elaborate series of events, now that I look back on it, but
that's funny.
That was role-playing, basically. Yeah.
Now, I'd be curious, as we go through these origin stories with different designers, Robin, it's not uncommon for there to be I was on a break for a decade or so. Were you continually playing these games, or was there a period of time where you put them down and then rediscovered them?
Even when briefly I didn't have a game group, I was still reading gaming stuff. And in fact, the way that I filled my gaming content during that time, which was early on in university, was I put up posters around the university I went to saying, do you want to play by mail? Because that was the only way I could do things. And one of the people I got in touch with who wanted to run a game by mail, also introduced me to a fanzine called Alarms and Excursions. And through that, and you could look up on the internet what Alarms and Excursions is and what its interesting contributor-directed format was. But the short version of that is that I then wound up writing about things that I was working on. And when I finally did get a gaming group, a very strange sort of tribal magic-oriented low magic fantasy campaign, and I got in touch with people like Jonathan Tweet and Rob Hainso. And through that, through another sequence of events, which I will collapse for the patience of your viewers, I wound up falling backwards into this being my career and my job. I had always thought of myself as a writer, but I'd maybe thought more about screenwriting or play, or particularly stage writing. But it wound up that I did this instead. And it turns out that there are a lot of people have been writing plays and novels and movies for many decades, but the field of role-playing was and is very new. And so there's a lot more opportunity to come in and put your stamp, not just on your own material, but on the entire form. So it's not something that I plan to do necessarily, but it's obviously what I wound up doing.
Yeah, spoiler alert, right?
Yes, so, hence this podcast.
So you say you backed into it, you fell into it, it ended up being what it was. Was there a moment where you're like, this is what I want to do? Or was it just all of a sudden you looked around and go, I guess this is how I'm making a living?
Well, I was definitely very excited to get involved, and I didn't realize, in fact, kind of quickly happened that I went from working on a few things to doing it full time.
Right.
And it's very difficult, has always been very difficult to make a full-time living as a role-playing, particularly tabletop role-playing game designer. But the video store that I was working at, that location closed, and I was briefly unemployed. And by the time the guy who owned that chain of video stores called me and asked me if I wanted to come back, I was, no, I'm a full-time writer now.
That's cool.
And so I was able to sort of exercise the discipline in order to do it, in order to keep doing it. And it is very, very difficult to make any sort of living making any art of any kind.
Yeah.
And the idea that you would turn up your nose at an opportunity to have an audience help shape an entire art form, I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. So you just casually said this, but it's interesting to me. You said you worked at a video store. I worked at a video store in high school, and I'd be curious if you, the legacy of that is the same as mine, which is I have seen a lot of movies, like a lot of movies. Did you just consume movies while you were there? I would bring home 3 or 4 a night. Yes,
absolutely. And we would have them on in the store, but I was already a huge movie fan. Hence my thinking of that as a job that I could possibly do. And I've always been a film fan, and it's the thing that my wife and I have in common. And going to the Toronto Film Festival every year has been a big part of that. And the contents of those films, particularly the films at TIFF, then the festivals later, and now the Toronto International Film Festival, have very much influenced my work and my understanding of narrative and my focus on narrative and narrative structure.
Yeah, that's where I was headed.
Which is part of my, design signature.
Yeah, because and we're obviously going to dig into it, but cinematic and narrative are 2 words that constantly come up when people talk about your work. So, guys, the Insider Insight series is my opportunity to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, creators, and to learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations, and that's what we're going to do with Robin. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about some of his early work in the 90s. We'll be right back.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
There are so many online retailers. It can be hard to find one that is trustworthy, has great prices, along with some reliable customer service. On the third floor, we love ordering our gaming goodies from Gadzooks Gaming. Their selection of terrain, miniatures, dice, custom decor, and conversion bits are curated for gamers by gamers. You'll find they have what you need and what you didn't know you needed to take your gaming fun to the next level. If you mention Third Floor Wars in the cart notes of your order, you'll also get a free gift. And you'll help support the podcast. Check out gadzooksgaming.com and mention Third Floor Wars on checkout to get that free gift. So you're making a living full time at this point, and doing your work, and we're going to get into GUMSHOE, we're going to get into Feng Shui and what you're working on now. But I'd be curious to know some of your early works, especially in retrospect, Robin. What do you consider some of the works that you worked on earlier that helped define and shape you as a developer and a designer?
Well, the two projects that got me into this at all would be writing additional material for Jonathan Tweet's Over the Edge. And this, in fact, was just part of our correspondence that we had at the time that sprang out of Alarms and Excursions. He was involved with Lion Rampant for a while in the creation of Osmagica. He got out for a while. He came back. And then he said, I'm working on a game with an unpublishable setting for my home group. And it's inspired, Robin, by this article that you wrote for Alarms and Excursions about what a William S. Burroughs role-playing game would look like. Now, it's very much a Jonathan Tweet take on William S. Burroughs. But I saw his material and I said, well, if you want to make it weird, here's a bunch of other stuff that can be in this. And so I just wrote up stuff just thinking he would use it in his game. But in fact, that wound up being essentially verbatim in Over the Edge. And in fact, there was a big debate at the time because in one of these things that I'd written just for Jonathan's use, there was an F-bomb in it. And there was a lot of agonizing over whether that word could ever be in a role-playing product. And it was determined that no, it couldn't. And both Jonathan and John Nephew of Atlas were very apologetic about this. And I didn't care at all. And of course now,
early censorship.
You wouldn't bat an eye at adult language in a role-playing game aimed at adults. And so that was adding surreal setting material to Jonathan's very free-form game mechanics and his very interesting, cool, weird world. The other thing was that tribal fantasy setting that I mentioned earlier. Out of the blue, I got a set of writer's guidelines from Steve Jackson Games saying, would you like to write a supplement based on this game you're describing in Alarms and Excursions? And so I did that as well. And it wound up being called GURPS Fantasy 2 Adventures in the Madlands. I
don't think I knew that was you. Wow.
That's my original first thing. And so after that, I wound up being contacted by other companies that were looking for freelancers, because at that time the community was very close-knit. It had one little online hub off in the corner of what they were beginning to call the internet. And so I got a bunch of opportunities to work on stuff for Earth Dawn, for FASA, big underground supplement, and a few other things. And from there, that led me to pitch Feng Shui to its original publisher.
So, Robin, when you look back at those early works, especially in the context now having so much design under your belt, right? You've learned, obviously, who you are now as a designer was not who you were then, right? And you know a lot, think about it differently, I would assume, than you did back then. But what did you figure out then? Was it trial and error, or do you think that you had a knack for it, or what led you to be able to be published at that point, do you think?
I think those original things were just acts of pure creation, because in neither case were they in fact intended for publication. It was a game book based on my home campaign, and it was a bunch of cool ideas for Jonathan. And I think it was the freedom of doing that that enabled me to sort of think, well, anything goes, you can break the mold. If I was to set out to write a commercial GURPS supplement, GURPS Fantasy 2 would not be it. But over the years, I have always followed that impulse to go, a lot of the stuff I do is like, here's a supplement for this game.
Yep.
Let's, paint within the lines. But a lot of times it's like, how can I do things differently and better than they've been done before? How can I format this better? How can this be a better experience? Because there's still a lot of ground to cover. And so I've always perhaps foolishly given myself permission to try and look at things in different ways and kind of take them apart and go, well, why would this experience be unsatisfying? How do we make it better? How would this feel like if it was a movie or a TV show? And is it disappointing if our game session doesn't feel enough like a movie or a TV show? Which I would argue it very often is, because that's people's frame of reference for storytelling. And so I guess what those early experiences gave me were the creative arrogance to say, well, I'm just going to try and do something wild and swing for the fences, or just do something different, or come at things from another angle.
So what do you if you were to try to narrow down some of the things that you think you have gotten better at, or things that have changed, but in these years since from that early worker, I've got a sense of what stayed the same, right? Things that you were doing back then that you've tried to keep through this whole process. What are things that you developed and discarded as far as your process?
If you look at the first edition of Feng Shui, you will notice that it makes a number of design errors, that it doesn't fully grasp the new thing that it's introducing. And so they're in the corners of it, there are bits of older school design that haven't quite been come to terms with. And they're both big and small examples of that. A big example of that is that original Feng Shui has non-player character equivalency, meaning that all of the characters work on the same rules mechanics. The new Feng Shui 2, what that does is it recognizes that what you need from foes, the stats that you need for them, and what level they're at, and how you operate them, are actually completely different than the stats for player characters, because their function is utterly different, and that you're not trying to. So that's an example of the old school thinking of we're kind of simulating a world. In this case, an utterly fanciful world. So let's have sort of a system of mathematics that explains how those bits of the world interact. And on one level, it talks a lot about it being emulative, and the most important elements of it are emulating, particularly in that case, the feel and style of Hong Kong action movies. But on other levels, it remains a more conventional design. On a simpler level, or I guess a more detail-oriented level, the way that bulletproof vests work in original Feng Shui is that they reduce the amount of damage that you get by a certain amount. But if you look at action movies, that's not at all what bulletproof vests do. Bulletproof vests in action movies are a one-shot resurrection spell. And that explains retroactively why you weren't dead when we thought you were. So that is not based literally on how bulletproof vest works in our world, because that's irrelevant to Feng Shui and to John Woo, but rather, and I'm not sure those are examples of doing things differently, of having a completely changed perspective. It's just going back with the benefit of hindsight and going, this bit doesn't actually fit what the basic underlying design of Feng Shui was trying to get at. And that's because it was the first game to do those things. And it's weird to look back at it and go, oh, this is the first major published game that said, oh, let the players describe stuff in the world.
That's crazy.
right? You would think that, oh, we've always had that, but nope.
Yeah.
Because people were kind of freaked out about it at the time, and other people looked at it and went, oh, well, I should do this in every game. And of course, the answer is yes, you should. And so there are people who say that Feng Shui changed the way that they gamed because that was the one that taught them what is now this basic element of what we do.
And I'll tell you, Robin, it amazes me because I took a large break. So I stopped playing in the early 90s, and GURPS Fantasy 2 was one of the last books I bought. And I came back to it 2 years ago, right? So I literally took 25, 30 years off. And that single thing you just described was one of the biggest changes that I saw. When I came back into role playing and realized that change, it was like, and for me, it was, happened overnight, right? Because I was Rumpelstiltskin during that time. And you're 100% correct. It's incredible. So would it be fair to say then, and I'm going to try to encapsulate what you said there, and if I'm off, please tell me, that you may have learned not to bring the baggage in, like you had some old mechanic baggage that you brought into Feng Shui 1, not really realizing it, and now through hindsight you learn that nothing's sacred, that you can re-examine everything and throw things out. Is that something that you consider yourself better at now?
Yeah. Well, certainly it's all about looking at, does this work? Does it get where we want to go? And if there are things that when I look back at them again, and if I ever get a second run at things, my impulse now is always, can I simplify this further? Can I make it simpler and more streamlined? And part of that is that the audience has changed, and not just in the 25 years where you were frozen in a block of ice in the Atlantic Ocean, but even over, a 5 or 6 year period, people's willingness to accept fairly simple mechanics, even in what is allegedly the trad space, has increased. And part of that is just that people are older and have less time and want to play more games. And you can only memorize D&D so many times. And after that, you want a simpler thing. And also new people are coming in. We don't, if you were to do a demographic survey of what gamers were when you left and now, there would be some pretty dramatic changes. And one of the less obvious ones is that the percentage of people who are mathematicians, physicists, engineers, and lawyers is down.
Interesting.
As a percentage. It's up in absolute numbers, but now we have way more people from humanities and other areas coming in, and their interest or patience for elaborate character generation or a fight that takes 3 hours may be different than you and I back in the day.
No, that's a very good point. I had not thought about that. Very, very true. Very, very true. So guys, let's take a quick break. And we kind of started talking about Feng Shui. I want to talk about it a lot more. So let's take a break. We'll talk about Feng Shui. Howdy friends, Craig here. You deserve a new playmat. Here on the 3rd floor, we use Mats by Mars. They are scratch resistant, waterproof, wet erase marker compatible, almost free of glare, and lighter than neoprene. Mats by Mars gives you over 40 designs to choose from. You pick a mat, pick a design, and then you pick an overlay, like one for Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars Legion, or even Malifaux 3rd Edition. Those overlays will really speed up your deployment and make the placement of objective markers so easy. Use our promotion code in the show notes to get a 10% discount on your first order. In the notes of your order, you can even request the 3rd floor logo on your mat for free. That makes the best mat in the business even a little better. So get some new mats, save yourself some money, and help support the show. Go to matsbymars.com. All the details are in the show notes, including the discount code. So one day when the archaeologists are in the Laws Museum and they're going through all of the artifacts and they're looking at the origins of Feng Shui, where were the first seeds, Robin? Where was the first kernel that would end up becoming Feng Shui?
So previously I mentioned the Toronto International Film Festival, then called the Festival of Festivals. And in 1988, the late programmer David Overby programmed a very influential retrospective of recent Asian films called Asian Horizons. And there are films from Japan and Korea and the rest of East Asia, but particularly he programmed a lot of Hong Kong cinema. And I saw a bunch of things then, but the ones that really hit home were John Woo's A Better Tomorrow, and also a really weird, offbeat, sort of comic booky fantasy film that I still love, that's very odd, called Savior of the Soul. And particularly watching Better Tomorrow, and then the next year when they programmed The Killer, the immediate thought was, why aren't role-playing games like this? Why doesn't combat feel like this in a role-playing game instead of this incremental, moment-by-moment slog where you're standing over a table for 90 minutes working out each little incremental thing? And so when there was a publisher who I thought would be receptive to a pitch, that is what I pitched. I said, this has great potential for a thing that, changes the way that we feel about action in role-playing games. And it's a subgenre, the Hong Kong action movie, that hasn't been covered yet. And very often, if you, back then particularly, if you were the first to hit a particular genre or subgenre, you kind of had first mover advantage and you would get attention and people would play your game. And so that is where basically the roots of taking my interest in film and narrative and translating it into the role-playing format and seeing what comes out of that. And so among the other things that came out of that were an awareness that even though pop culture, and particularly sort of nerdy fantasy action, comic booky genres that are the bread and butter of role-playing then and now, the fans of those often have been taught, for example, that stereotypes or archetypes, as I prefer to call them, are bad and a sign of lazy writing, when of course they are the very core of all of it. And what's interesting is what you do with those archetypes, and that they're just as important a bit as a building block of narrative and addressing the assumptions of the audience as lighting or music or anything else in an accessible bit of pop culture filmmaking. And so one of the other messages of Feng Shui is, don't be so snobby, role-playing fans, about cliches and about stereotypes, because those are actually also tools, and in fact they're even more useful and more forgivable if you do nothing with them but replicate them in a tabletop format, because it is about group creation. And so you want to be able to do something that everybody understands the second you do it, and something that you can think up quickly and put in the pot. So if you go, well, I'm a ninja and I'm rappelling down the side of the building, that's all you need, and everybody understands that. Or in the case, and it also, Feng Shui had to introduce people in North America and the rest of the English-speaking world to cliches they didn't know about yet, because there's a VHS era and nobody, is a couple of steps ahead of them on all of these films. And so, later everybody would know what it was when a person with a white Armani suit and cool sunglasses came through the door with a gun in each hand, both guns blazing. But at the time, that was a cliche that I had to teach you so that you could then go ahead and use it. And so another message of Feng Shui is, it's not just okay, but it's good in role-playing to draw on these stock elements, because they are the basic building blocks of storytelling. Right. And then the rest of the design was all about taking a pre-existing rule set that was a little bit GURPSy and a little bit simulative, and trying to pull all of those guts out of it, and to sort of save the initiative system, which had an interesting sort of staggered use of initiative, which felt like cutting between characters in the middle of a fight scene and making it faster and making it more forgiving, because, of course, to properly do Choi Hawk or John Woo or Ringo Lam, you have to have characters take 5 or 6 bullets and keep on going. And so, and that is also where things like if you, as the player, don't get to describe what's in the environment, you're not going to come up with cool stunts that you can do. We were talking about errors in Feng Shui. The original Feng Shui, there's a rule everybody ignores because it's so obviously wrong, that it actually made stunts slightly more difficult mechanically, when, of course, it's the other way around. Everything you should do should be a stunt that you get rewarded for. But that's so out of keeping with the rest of the game that it's invisible. People don't even notice it's there.
Isn't that funny? So as you went through the iterations, and in a moment I want to talk about obviously moving to Feng Shui 2, but through the initial iterations of Feng Shui, the initial Feng Shui, what were some breakthroughs for you? Do you remember some moments where, because when I hear a lot of designers talk about it, there seems to be a couple moments, and they tend to happen towards late in the design process, I hear, where they said, you know what, and then I threw that out, and all of a sudden everything made sense. Was there any breakthrough moments in the iterations?
Actually, the big shift happened very early when I was using the original mechanics and just realized, oh no, they're way too deadly. Like we did a shootout and everybody died immediately. And oh no, that. Yeah. But once that got corrected, it was a matter of just trying to take the tools that I had and match them to the vision in my head.
Gotcha. So when does the possibility of Feng Shui 2 start to bubble up?
Well, there's this thing that came along called Kickstarter. So previous to that, there were occasional discussions with John Nephew about redoing it, but it was really the business factor of being able to fund it and do a bang up job of it, and at that point, it became clear that people wanted new, lavish, updated versions of the things that they already loved. Now they want a bunch of other things too, including exciting new things like Hillfolk, for example, and many other great things by other designers. But it seemed like an obvious thing to finally create the funding that would be needed to really do it upright. And, we reached an era where full color printing was affordable, so it could finally look good. And the very first one was in color, but it was so in a way it was a return to form there. But the new version, Hal Mangold's art direction and graphic design, looks a lot more like Hong Kong action movies than the
gorgeous
previous versions had ever done.
Yeah.
And initially I thought, I'll just go in. It'll be a very quick process to just sort of fix a few things. And then when I looked at it and saw all the things that I just talked about, I went, oh no, this is going to be actually a bottom-up refit. Wow. So I wound up spending a lot more time on it than I had originally anticipated, but I think that more than paid off.
So I'd be interested, and let's use the Feng Shui 2 as an example. Coming to the point where you put the pencils down and you say, I'm done. For you, is that the deadline's coming and I'm going to do everything I can until that deadline hits? Or is there an end parentheses, an end bracket to your process where you go, you know what? I'm done. I'm putting the pencils down.
Well, first of all, if today you're designing your role-playing game with pencils, I would advise to use a computer instead.
You know what I mean, Robin.
That's my tip for aspiring game designers. With any... I think role-playing game is like a film in that there is the potential to go on forever, and you have to discipline yourself to just stop and then hope that the next people in the line will catch your mistakes during editing and so forth. And so because I do this for a living, I am pretty ruthless about my time, and I try to, when it's a writing day where I'm writing new words, I have a quota of words that I have to hit every day to feel that I've successfully done that. Some days I go over. Yep. Some days I beat the word hill. Some days the word hill beats me. But over a stretch of time, I always hit a quota. And also I have a quota for time spent editing and revising. But you've got to get it right. And you've got to hope that everybody else down the line also catches the things that you don't see. Right. Because, of course, as a writer and creator, there's a certain point where A, you see what you meant to write, and B, you just go text blind and go, I'm done, next person. Yep. So part of discipline is to stop working on things and actually get them out the door, because there's, if you just think that you can work on it until it's perfect, it's never going to be perfect. And at some point, not only are people who are expecting it going to be disappointed that it's not out and then think it's old hat, But eventually you start de-improving it, and it's time to like a true Hong Kong action movie character. If you've got a bag full of guns, it's time to occasionally you throw down the guns instead of reloading them and just pick up other guns and move on to another project. So I try to be pretty strict with myself about going, okay, well, theoretically this could be better, but I'm not going to make it any better now, and it's ready and it's good. It's time to put it out.
How about your relationship with playtesting as a process that you enjoy, dread, a little bit of both?
Well, it's absolutely essential, right? It's like asking someone who's building a house, how do you feel about plumbing? It's like, I'm pretty sure plumbing is important in most buildings, and so is playtesting.
Right, but not everybody that builds houses likes doing the plumbing, right?
Right. Well, so here, rather than discuss whether I like it or not, I'll give you tips on how to do it.
That'd be great.
One key thing is to be insulated as the designer from the playtesters, so that you are not the one directly communicating with them. Now, obviously, not everybody is going to have other team members who can step up and do that, but I think it's very important because then you're not receiving emotional petitioning from the players who want it to be a particular way and are going to try to talk you into that. Another part of that is don't let the players communicate with each other, because then the person who's the best at arguing will convince all of the others that they had a different experience than they had. Next tip is you will almost invariably get one person, and it's usually one person, who completely hates it, and it's just utterly wrong for them. Recently, I did something where nobody hated it, and it made me a little nervous. And so expect that, be prepared for that. The suggestions that players give you or GMs give you on how to fix things are almost invariably wrong. But you have to ignore that, and instead of looking at their solution, which is, I repeat, wrong, you have to find the other solution to that problem. And the other most vital thing is I want to know what actually happened at your table. I don't want a 6,000 word write-up of what the things happen on a character level, but I want to know we got to this scene and the clues didn't make sense in the case of a scenario, or we ran the combat system and everybody died, or the monsters were too easy to defeat. And so I'm less interested in people's opinions, especially their opinions that are aesthetically derived from their theories of what they think they like at the table, as opposed to what actually happened in their games. And even with my home group, I will get feedback from them, but what I really am interested in is how engaged they are and what their emotional responses are during the game itself, and less about what they literally say about the experience afterwards. Because gamers in particular who live in their heads will often talk themselves out of having liked things for theoretical reasons. And you, as a designer, are not interested in your playtesters' theories about games. You're interested in whether the combat was fast or slow, or whether you successfully wrote your rules in a clear way, and whether they're consistent with each other.
So the almost guaranteed, though recently this didn't happen, the almost guaranteed one person that does not like the game, the playtester that hates it, is there value to be found from that person's thoughts, or do you just have to go, you know what, I'm going to have one?
No, the game was not designed for them.
Okay, good.
Someone else will design the game they like.
That's good.
Because they're rejecting the premise.
Right. So there's no, that makes total sense to me. And you, I think you would be, well, I guess you could hurt things if you were to try to warp things to satisfy all 10 of them, right?
Right. And often the person who hates it is more trad. Although I have had people, on occasion had my entire group hated this playtester then become an avid player of the game. So and a lot of it often is if you have an original game that does something differently, and the play group actually has one rule set that was designed in 1983 that they really like. Their initial resistance to that is going to be very high, and all you're getting is a measure of their frustration and anger at being confronted with something that they didn't think the world needed.
Sure. So the game's out there, both Feng Shui 1, Feng Shui 2, and as that's happening, tons of innovative concepts, designs, and things like that. Were there reactions that surprised you? Either, wow, I didn't realize that this would be what the takeaways would be, or some positive stuff. You're like, boy, I guess I didn't realize that I was doing that. What were the reactions that surprised you?
I didn't expect so many people over the years to come up and say, this totally changed the way I run games and run all of my games. So that's, the best thing that you can possibly hear, right? So you need to be an egotist to make art, but I'm not enough of an egotist, or at least not at that time, to have anticipated that so many people would say that.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this, we're going to talk about another game that changed how people think about how you play games, specifically a certain genre of games. We're going to talk about the Gumshoe. We'll be right back. Right now is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content you're already getting for free. They'll go on and explain that by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we commit to not interrupting your episode of Tabletop Talk with such a plea. We pledge not to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month. Even if there's a link in this show's description, and there is, we won't ask you to click it and become a patron. We won't spend time yammering about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting those episodes without ad breaks, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode. We needed to clarify that we wouldn't do this type of solicitation.
Hi, this is Brian. I started listening to Third Floor Wars for information and insight about my favorite miniatures game, Malifaux. But I also get great interviews with game writers, designers, and artists, as well as some fantastic role-playing sessions with some really great players. I've been supporting them on Patreon for 1.5 years so far, and it has been well worth it.
Time to do a quick shout out to our most recent patrons. A special thanks goes out to J. Douglas Nielsen, Patrick Healy, Ifrit V. Diablo, Greg Packman, Eric Conrad, Joe Root, Alan Cardinal, Raven Zatto, Richard Beach, Philip Savoy, Patrick Allen, Third, Sean P. Kelly, Jesse Ravicki, James Can, Rage Quit Wire, and Dackrell. Because of you and the 100 other plus patrons, we're able to put out material on a weekly basis, and it's appreciated. So you change things with Feng Shui, but somewhere lurking out there is Gumshoe. So I'd be curious, where that comes from. So where are the beginning seeds of Gumshoe?
On a business level, the seeds are in, not on a design level so much, are in the Dying Earth role-playing game, which is the first game that I designed for Pelgrane Press, based on the classic fantasy short stories of Jack Vance, and where I was introduced to Simon Rogers, the publisher of Pelgrane Press. And so Dying Earth was his first project. And then a few years later, when he decided he wanted to produce another tabletop game, he had a problem he wanted me to fix. And he wanted that fix in the form of a role-playing game. And so he said, I want a solution to the classic problem in mystery games, or as we call them, Call of Cthulhu, where you roll to get a clue and you fail to get a clue, and right. The story stops. Yep. And so I looked at that problem, and Gumshoe is the answer to that. And so the core thing about Gumshoe is it recognizes that there are certain skills that are never interesting to fail at. And those skills are the informational skills, the ones where you gather information, because it's never interesting to fail to get information. and which is actually an even bigger and more radical statement than the story shouldn't stop because you fail a roll.
Right.
Because and so if you have an investigative ability in Gumshoe, it's exactly the same as Call of Cthulhu, especially in Trail of Cthulhu, which is Pelgrane's licensed version of Call of Cthulhu, which adapts it to the Gumshoe system, as brilliantly done by Kenneth Haidt. That when you make your library use roll in Call of Cthulhu, you say, oh, well, I need to find something in this library. I roll library use. What do I find? And then you roll, and if you succeed, the GM tells you. And if you fail, the GM spends 20 minutes faffing around trying to get you the same information in some other way and drags out the story.
True.
Right. And Gumshoe is exactly the same, except you skip that part where you roll and you just get the information. To this day, some people, it's such a simple change that it's difficult for everybody to grok, no matter how clearly we explain it. And immediately, the response to that you're asking what surprising responses. There was a response from some corners that said, well, no one ever actually does that in their games. Everybody just gives them the information.
That's not true.
Well, that's not true. There's no indication in the rule set, at least the rule sets that existed before Gumshoe, that you would ever dream of doing that. And as the designer of Gumshoe, when I'm at a big convention like Gen Con, and so anybody is in a game where that happens to them, they then immediately leave the game and come to the Pelgrane booth to complain to me about it. To which, if I weren't polite, my response would, why were you playing a non-Gumshoe game? That seems to have been your error right there.
That's
sometimes
funny.
people say there was a scan roll at the very beginning of the scenario and we failed it, so there was no scenario. And that still happens now.
Yeah.
Now, there are all sorts of knock-on effects of doing that, which is if you make all information available on the grounds that all information is interesting, it becomes more like a standard mystery or even a real-life police investigation where you've got a ton of facts, and instead of the question is, do I find the book in the library that tells me to go to the old mill, it's, I've got all sorts of facts and information and rumors, for example, like all of the documents in Lovecraft's actual story, Call of Cthulhu, and now I have to correlate the contents. I have to put them together and see what's going on. And, of course, very briefly in Gumshoe, there are another set of skills because there are other things that are interesting, if sometimes horrible, to fail at. So if you're running away from the Shoggoth or trying to fix your plane in mid-flight or trying to spot someone who is shadowing you, those have an interesting thing that happens either way, whether you succeed or fail. And so there's a different system for those where you use resource pool points to increase your results on a D6. And so the balance of those two things means that there is still unpredictability, not just in the player choices, but in the outcomes of these general abilities. And together, that's what gives you something that feels like a horror mystery or a space mystery or a sword and sorcery mystery or whatever sort of version of Gumshoe you've decided to play.
So, Robin, one of the things that changed for me, and Gumshoe was part of this, was I used to, like a lot of people in the early 90s that were playing games, I made you roll for everything, right? If at any point you invoked something that was a skill in GURPS, I made you roll for it, and we ended up in the situations you just talked about. I very quickly, when I returned, realized that you just, this statement changed everything for me. Well, you're good at this, so yeah, you found it. Or yeah, you're able to climb that wall. That's not an issue, right? And just it sounds really dumb, Robin, but blew my mind and completely changed how I played games.
Well, it's not dumb, though, because every single role-playing game that you picked up until then did that.
Yeah.
All of the designers were making that mistake, right? And if you give people a rule, surprise, they're going to use it.
Yeah.
And so when you don't want people to, have, well, you should make a jump roll to see if you jump that creek. Well, would James Bond possibly fail at jumping that creek? No. In fact, it would be rather unremarkable for him to jump the creek. You would even discuss it. Yep. And so if you don't want certain rules to be used all the time, don't have them there, is the answer.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. Very, very good point. Well, guys, let's take one more break. And when we get back from this break, I want to talk about some of the other works, especially some of the most recent work that Robin's put out. So we'll be right back.
How
Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRDFLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats. So we covered stuff, Robin. I appreciate it. You have talked about Feng Shui and GUMSHOE so many times, and I appreciate you doing it one more time here on this show. But I want to talk about stuff that you're excited about now. So what are some things that you have got either out recently or stuff that we haven't covered?
Well, the other major design that we should talk about a bit is Hillfolk, which is the drama system rules, and it does for dramatic character interaction what Feng Shui does for action movies and what GUMSHOE does for mystery. So the object there is to create a dynamic that allows you to have interaction between player characters that feels like an extended dramatic storyline. So it is the game that would allow you to play The Sopranos or Succession or pretty much any premium cable drama that you can think of that does not have a strong procedural element, right? You would have to come up with some sort of hybrid if you wanted to use it for Game of Thrones, because there are a lot of points where whether you win or lose a battle matters. But most shows where it's just about people and how they change each other or don't, is based on, again, looking at the structure of how dramatic scenes work and finding a very simple mechanism to encourage players to create those on the fly. And those, in particular, that structure comes out of one of my books of advice/theory called Hamlet's Hit Points, which takes three classic narratives, Hamlet, as you might guess, Dr. No, and Casablanca, and breaks them down into the narrative beats that they use and how they establish an up and down rhythm of engagement by moving you toward fear sometimes and toward hope other times. And one of the major types of beat is the dramatic beat, in which there's a petitioner, someone who wants something, and a grantor, and someone who decides whether to meet their emotional need or withhold the need. And that is the core thing behind Hillfolk. And so it comes with the baseline setting, which is sort of a dehistoricized version of the Iron Age and the Levant. And then there are a ton of other settings written not just by me, but a ton of other luminaries of the industry from back when we did the Kickstarter for that. So if anyone is looking to connect all the dots in my design, that's another one that they're going to have to look at. Can we?
I want to delve a little bit because I'm far more familiar with Feng Shui and with GUMSHOE, so I understand the problem that it sounds like Hillfolk solves, but I don't have a sense of, and maybe this is a 3 podcasts worth of a question, but how did you solve that? So how did you fix that and answer that in Hillfolk?
So basically, every dramatic scene is a negotiation of an emotional negotiation in which, in the simplest form, the character initiating the scene wants something, and they want it from the other person. And there's a reason why the other person doesn't give it to them. So let's imagine for the moment that I am the chieftain of this Iron Age tribe, and you are my son, and I want you to go off and be heroic and go on a raid and impress the rest of the tribe, illustrating that they're in good hands with the heir to the chieftainship.
Right.
You, on the other hand, want to write poetry and weave baskets. So I come to you and I say, small wrist, it is time that you stepped up and abandoned your stupid poetry and set aside these ridiculous baskets, which aren't even in the style of the rest of our culture, I might add, and become a brave warrior. And the horse people on the other side of the ridge are, they've been getting out of line. They're asking for it. It's time someone gave them the smackdown. I, of course, could easily do it. They would quail in fear to see me riding my horse over the ridge. But it's time for you to learn to make the horse folk quail in fear. So I'm sure you will do that, as I and your mother desire. And you would respond.
But Dad, I love writing poetry and I love baskets.
Yes, you've demonstrated that, but these things are useless to our society. It is time that you made yourself useful. You realize you've shamed your mother, don't you?
So I'm completely engaged with this. Is it an escalation?
So what happens is eventually, if we were to continue that dialogue, there would be a point where you either decided to give in,
right,
and give me something. You said, well, I'm not going to abandon poetry, but I will, and I'm not going to lead the raid, but I'll go with my friend who's better at fighting. Okay, Dad. And so that would count as your meeting the petition.
Okay.
And in that case, you would get a drama token, which is taken from the central resource pool in the middle of the table. Unless, that is, I already had a drama token, in which case I would have to give you my drama token because you met my desires.
Interesting.
If, on the other hand, you just said, nope, I don't care what you think, I don't care what Mom thinks, I have baskets to make, screw you, Dad, you would have rebuffed my petition, and either you would give me your drama token if you had one, or I would take one from the central resource pile if you don't. And then the next player over in the order, which might be you, might be another player, would then pick someone else to have an interaction with, and they might pick another player, or they might pick the GM who plays all of the supporting characters.
Right.
And so as you go along and create those scenes, the points, the drama tokens start to build up. And once you have 2 drama tokens, I can force you, the other player, to come toward me, and I slide those 2. You get them. You become the new owner of those drama tokens, but then you have to say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll go in that raid. On the other hand, if you already have 3 and you really don't want to give in, you slide those 3 my way. Now I have 5, but you got to, again, rebuff me and go back to your basket weaving. And so as you create that over the course of an evening, you have a really funny, engaging dynamic where it's just all talking and character interaction. So there is a little procedural system because occasionally you will want to determine whether that raid succeeds or not. But 9 times out of 10, or 19 times out of 20, in fact, you will, when you call your scene, you'll go, oh, we lost the raid. I come back wounded, crawling over and I'm going to go and talk to Mom and ask her why she told me to go do this. And then the player playing your mom goes, I didn't tell him to send you over. What's that? Right. And so if she mollifies you, she's meeting your need and giving you a drama token. If she says, of course I meant to shame you, and I wish I'd shamed you harder, you loser, then you would get the drama token.
That's fantastic.
It just creates an improvised story over the course of the whole evening, and then you continue them from session to session. And of course, there's more to it, like how the character generation creates the sort of conflicts that you can then play at the table. But that's basically the dynamic. So that's, radically different from Feng Shui and from Drama System, Feng Shui and GUMSHOE.
Yeah, no, that's fast. So this was a huge mistake bringing this up because now I'm completely fascinated by this, Robin. Where the hell did that idea come from? Because that you once again kind of blew my mind a little bit. That's really interesting.
Well, again, it was from studying how scenes work for Hamlet's hit points, and then going, well, okay, how do I actuate this into an actual playable game? And so it's different from a lot of other story games in that it is a wrapper in which you can play all sorts of different stories, rather than something that's very specifically tailored to tell one story and then you're out.
And what has been the reaction to that? I mean, this again is taking something that we see everywhere in games. We see people house rule this stuff. We see it handled all different. We see sometimes games don't address it at all. And then you do this. What was the feedback that you got when that was out in the wild?
Well, the reaction was very gratifying. The initial Kickstarter did extremely well for at that time for a story game sort of thing, and it won the Diana Jones Award, which is an extremely coveted award because, of course, there's only one given out every year, and it's often heartbreaking to see games in all sorts of different categories, or not even games, but abstract concepts sometimes go up against games, against business models. And so it's having that chosen by a mysterious panel of peers was also, of course, very gratifying.
I bet. So one of the other things that I picked up very early on when I came back is your book, The Laws of Good Game Mastering. And that was written a little bit ago. You didn't write that yesterday, but it's referenced all the time. And it's discussed all of the time. And I'd be curious, and again, we could do a whole podcast about just what you wrote about in that book, but I'd be curious to know, is there things that's in that book now that doesn't apply to your thought process now, or does that still capture the way that you look at things?
Well, I haven't gone back and looked at it.
Okay.
When I do revisit it, I'm sure there are things that I will find that I will do differently and at greater length because it's a short book. But the other main thing is it's talking about player assumptions, and player assumptions have certainly evolved a lot over that period. Yeah. And that is going to be different. But again, that was something that a rather obvious thing being laid out in detail, which is if you want to have a good game, figure out what your players collectively want and do that. You would think
radical idea.
That's another duh moment. But it was not, which is why people find that book useful and still find it useful. Yep. Sometimes and for a long time, it wasn't available in print. It was just a PDF. And people wanted it back in print, I think, because they wanted to give it to their GM as a sort of gift/hint. Yeah. But I think the basic assumptions in that book still work, especially in the trad space. And it's a simple concept, but it's about having people accept. And there are people who still argue that, no, the GM is an auteur and the players should shut up and like it. That's obviously not my point of view.
Right.
But also just having it laid out and also thinking about things in categorical terms. So, my player is sort of a power gamer.
Right.
My player is more, and in the, I think it was D&D, I even forget my D&Ds now. I think the 3rd edition DMG Guide 2 has my, at that time, somewhat newer take on those ideas.
So one of the aspects of your book that I hear talked about a good bit, and both as a criticism and as a praise, is the player bucketing, right? The labeling of types of players. Is that something that you still think is important to understand and be able to put players in buckets and understand how to handle them based off of those categorizations?
Well, people hate being categorized and fall into categories. So, and people are sort of mixes of things, but yes, absolutely, I still see the impulses behind those different things, and other people see them as well. So, again, there are people who, it's reductive to categorize the fact that I only identify with my character and what they would do and never think about the story. And I'm the only person who ever does this. And my GM must deal with me as a perfect flower rather than looking at this description that absolutely nails everything I do and everything I'm all about and gives me advice on how to handle it.
You've never met anybody like that, have you, Robin?
No, these people are all just entirely hypothetical.
That's funny. How about your podcast, the Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff?
So that's a weekly podcast that I do with the aforementioned Kenneth Haidt, who has worked on a lot of GUMSHOE stuff with me, and we've collaborated on other things as well over the years. And it is our weekly look at gaming. And so it always starts with a segment called the Gaming Hut, in which we give actionable gaming advice. And then other topics of interest, whether it be horror, cinema, the world of the occult, UFOs and the paranormal, which we call elliptony, history, which is Ken's forte, and of course food, which was not initially one of the things we thought we would talk about, but our sponsor emeritus, John Kovalik, who did our beautiful cartoon art of us, his payment for doing that was getting to pick a segment, and he wanted us to do a food hut.
Nice.
And so we thought, okay, John, we'll do one, and then no one else will care. But it's one of the most popular segments on the show. So, so in an episode that's coming up, for example, we look at the history of cocktails in the 19th century. So it has historical detail in it sometimes. Yeah. But other times we're just talking about, weird old spiral-bound cookbooks we found or something. But the vast majority of it is about the sort of storytelling frameworks that I've been talking about in this podcast, or very specific gaming things, or the games we work on, or all of the historical and cultural factors that fold into those games.
So I'd be curious, Robin, you've been around a bit. You've been in the industry for a while. How are you feeling about the current status of the RPG world? Are you excited? Are you concerned? Is there things that you're excited about, things you're concerned about?
Well, it's clearly blowing up. There is. So there is one thing you're mentioning about things that were in the Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering that I would change. There's one thing that has now become wrong, which is that the book says that role-playing is the only art form without an audience, where the people who are creating it are the audience. The same thing. Yeah. Well, it turned out that what we really needed to blow up this and make it incredibly popular, this long-standing form of interactive entertainment, was to turn it back into passive entertainment and put it on the internet.
Yeah.
So that people can listen to other people play and watch other people play. And it turns out they like that. And that has grown the audience enormously, in part because it is even better than the how a role-playing game works sidebar in showing you how it works. Yep. And it's brought in a whole new audience, people from different walks of life. So we've never had a broader range of people playing and bringing their experiences to gaming, and they've just made it bigger. So, there's even a chance this will catch on and become an even bigger thing, or that some of the gaming properties, as they're already starting to do, will filter into movies and TV, and at some point maybe it'll be a big hit, and then you'll have a crazy thing where there's a big scramble to turn all of the classic games and even some not so classic games. Like, there's already a Tales for the Loop television show.
It's amazing, isn't it?
There's so much television I haven't even watched it yet, which is another unrelated but bizarre phenomenon of today. So if more people are in role-playing and having fun role-playing and think of it as a fun hobby, that's really the important thing. And I was very gratified to see that game sales actually went up during the pandemic because people wanted to play more because they could do so online. The lockdown wiped out many people's activities or way of interacting, but gaming is something that you can do, albeit with adjustments over the internet. And I think now normally you would fear, once people can leave the house again safely, that will drop away. But I think still the hunger to get together and have real conventions again and play in person is also great. So I don't think we'll see a drop in play. If anything, we might see another little uptick. So
I agree.
The thing about role-playing games is that for most of the history of them, through most of the history of steady, if not exponential growth, people would ask at conventions at a Q&A, what do you think about the fact that the hobby is dying? And people can't ask that anymore. I think you missed 25 years of that.
Yeah, I did.
But now you can't ask that question anymore because it's obvious, even to the hoariest grognards among us, that the hobby is growing and there's a new generation. And as always, there are differences in taste between generations, which is good and proper, and more people coming in. And bringing their perspectives and ways of looking at things, and that's all to the good.
No, I agree. All right, so hold on to your chair for a second, Robin, because I'm gonna stroke your ego for a bit, but then I'm gonna transition that into a question. So,
Okay.
your name, when I come back, your name kept coming up, innovations, and I would seek out, what are they? Oh, wow, holy cow, look at Feng Shui. And then I would go, well, what the hell is that? That's amazing, right? I'd be interested, though, who's blown your mind? And it doesn't have to be somebody today. It could be somebody 10 years ago. But is there designs, games, or designers out there that made Robin go, oh, wow, that's something?
Well, I sadly do not pretend to be as au courant on what other people are doing, because of the aforementioned discipline of doing this for a living.
Yeah.
And so I don't get a chance to play a lot of other people's games, for example, because when I'm playtesting something, I should be playtesting my own stuff.
True.
To make it better. Yep. So I would look more to, formative influences. And of course, the big two there would be Sandy Peterson and especially Greg Stafford.
Yeah.
Because they really sort of lit the way in terms of role-playing being a narrative art form. So rather than leave anybody today who's working, and of course Sandy is still going great guns.
Yeah, he was on the show. He's just a joyful human being.
I would say Sandy and Greg are the
great.
two sort of people I would point to.
So for listeners, Robin, that need to get more Mr. Laws, where should they go?
You can find the various Gumshoe games, including the very newest one, the Yellow King role-playing game, the first one, the Esoterrorists, and also Fear Itself, Mutant City Blues, Ashen Stars, also Ken's Gumshoe games, Knights Black Agents and Trail of Cthulhu, and other Gumshoe games as well, and Hillfolk are all at Pelgrane Press, so that's pelgranepress.com. And Feng Shui is from Atlas Games, that's atlas-games.com. And Hamlet's Hit Points and Beating the Story, which is the outgrowth of Hamlet's Hit Points that is just about traditional narrative, about fiction and writing for the screen and comic books, is also from Game Playwright, that's gameplaywright.net. I've also written 8 novels. You can go to Amazon to find those, and edited a series of fiction anthologies. So there's lots of stuff to do if you run over to Google. But the main body of stuff is Pelgrane Press, Atlas Games, and Game Playwright.
So, guys, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and have all of that linked, including a link to the Amazon list of your work. I'll have all of that in the show notes. Robin, I can't thank you enough. This was a huge favor to me and to the audience for you to spend an hour and a half with us, and I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And for those of you that stuck around all the way to the end, I appreciate you too. Thanks for listening. Take care. Hey, did you hear that? You leveled up. You finished another episode of Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. If you want more from the third floor, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Head on over to our YouTube channel. It is packed with painting tutorials, gaming tips, battle reports, and role-playing actual plays. Did you enjoy this episode? Why don't you send a link to one of your friends so they can enjoy it too? Last but not least, write us a review on your podcatcher of choice. This helps us find listeners almost as cool as you. Yeah, that was mind-blowing when I read Gumshoe, man. And for me...
That is my goal, to blow people's minds.
Yeah, and you did, because I was just like... And what it was, and this happened to me when I was reading Harper, but again, coming from out of it, it's just like, all of it was so foreign and immediately made sense to me. You know what I mean? So, all right. Because we're covering so much, I think, because the whole idea here, Robin, is for me to understand your process. We've learned a lot that first segment. I imagine this will be even shorter, right? Because we don't need to reiterate, who you are. But let's see where it goes. But I just don't want you to feel obligated because we spent 15 minutes on Feng Shui. We're going to spend 15 minutes on Gumshoe. Right. Because as I am learning and understanding you a little bit better, so is my audience. So this is perfect, by the way. All right, I'll bring us back. Robin, that was perfect, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
As soon as you said video store, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense to me now. That's really funny. This I purposely left wide open, Robin. Whatever you would like to talk about here is what I want to talk about. So I will just kind of kick it off, and I'll kind of frame it as kind of pre-Feng Shui, pre-Gumshoe. Actually, I need to ask you, how do I pronounce that game?
Well, this is a question to which there is no single answer, because every Chinese dialect pronounces it slightly differently, and people in North America and in other English-speaking territories also pronounce it differently. So if you listen to a Cantonese movie and hear them say those words, they say something closer to Feng Shui, but no one here says that, and so you can't be understood while saying it. So I used to just do it phonetically and say Feng Shui, but now I say Feng Shui, which is what people say in North America. And the idea of how you pronounce any given Chinese word is incredibly fraught, even before you get to the fact that if you're not trained in those languages, there's a bunch of those sounds you can't even make.
Well, good. That makes me feel like less of an idiot then, because I've heard it pronounced, and I was like, well, is that how it sounds then? And I figured, you know what? I'm going to have Robin on the show. I'm going to ask him. All right, I'll bring us back. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.